So it's time we have a serious conversation about black gays dating white men. There's a constant conversation, or I don't want to even say constant conversation. There is a constant groan or expectation that when we see prominent black gay figures or people who just come out, they end up dating somebody who's not black. And there is a collective haul, you know, and it leads to a bunch of mental gymnastics where it turns out to be this disingenuous, love who you love, I don't care. But on some level, we do care. It is nice to see another black person loving another black person because it is very difficult to do so. And I will admit, however, it is the most political thing we can do as a people. And so I wanted to talk to somebody through a scholarly lens to talk about black gays in Hollywood and interracial dating and even what that means further into people who aren't celebrities, because there's an influx of people on social media who are trying to justify and amplify these thoughts and ideals surrounding interracial dating and purporting it to be, of a higher conscious. And that's not fucking true. So, I asked my dearest friend, Dr. Winder of University of California, Santa Barbara, to come on and talk to me, or us rather, and debunk and process what it is to be black and date interracially and what this means going forward. This was all inspired by the show with Gerard Carmichael, and which I don't plan on seeing. I know a lot of people have asked me if I'm going to watch it. I'm not, because I feel like it's, even in the clips that I've seen going around on social media and even the previews, it's very emotionally violent. And I don't think that I'm in the space to watch that. Or do I need to consume that type of media, because I'm already secure in who I am, and I don't necessarily need to go on somebody else's journey to discover that A, that they black, and B, that they gay. I crossed in 97, got my letters. I am a fucking Grand Basilisk, Poobah, whatever you want to call it. And peace to them in their journey. But I see why other people would enjoy it or find it or deem it necessary. Um, well, not really, because I feel like if you would just find some friends of your own, you could process this or go talk to the lady, right? But either here or there, let's chat with Dr. Winder to see if he can make sense of this all.
Again, yeah, my research is really about racial and sexual stigma. So, a lot of my work that I'm working on right now is a book project about how Black gay men in Los Angeles navigate racial and sexual stigma,
Mm.
hoping that that will be out next year. And that's one of my projects. But I also look at generally just what is the Black experience broadly in the U.S. And so I have some projects that look at sexual health and sexual wellness. So how do friends talk about biomedical interventions like PrEP and PEP? How do they talk about STDs and sexual relationships among their peers? And then a bit about a new project I've been working on with a collaborator about how Black millennials and Gen Z Americans are practicing African traditional or diasporic religions, and how that has layered onto the queer population. So folks who are gender queer, but also sexuality queer in that way. So those are some of my ongoing projects. I also have a project in New Orleans that I'm collecting that also looks at like Black, gay, and queer community and development among Black gay men in New Orleans. So those are my ongoing projects right now.
Busy, busy, and I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of our discussion today is surrounding that.
Yes.
Um, I was talking to you about this. All came about with a lot of people have been asking me to watch this Gerard Carmichael show, and I
Mm-hmm.
actively am refusing because I, full disclosure, I don't have time for Johnny come latelys to this shit. You know what I mean? I crossed in
Mm-hmm.
'97. I am I wear my letters proudly, FAG, and I have,
Mm-hmm.
I'm well aware and I've done the work, and I
Mm-hmm.
guess I have some little bit more work to do because I'm trying to understand what it is to be in Los Angeles and being Black and gay, because it is a different subculture than what I have learned to be in. All my formative years or gay formative
Mm-hmm.
years were in New York, which is a different type of climate when it comes to dating and dealing
Mm-hmm.
with their own issues.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
and so a lot of this is spawning about interracial dating.
Mm-hmm.
I often find myself, or a lot of people on social media have this discussion about, Black gay in Hollywood and how niggas in Hollywood don't date other niggas in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
You find one Black celeb and you find a white one on their arm. And and oftentimes, as much as people try to do the mental gymnastics and say, I don't care what this means, you love who you love, there is a a little tinge of resentment slash whatever the fuck, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
how do you perceive like the prevalence of interracial dating with us, here?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's come up a lot in some of my work as well. I don't primarily focus on dating and interracial dating, but I do think from a prevalence perspective, at least for me, it really depends on what types of communities we're talking about. So the vast majority of people that I encounter in my work are Black people who date Black people.
Mhm.
And that just is how it has been. But to your point about Hollywood, that is a different type of conversation, right? So, like, what does it mean to be seen at a high level of visibility and then having a partner of a different race, in particular, having a white partner? What does that mean? And what does that message does that send? I also think this conversation comes up a lot, not just with actors or entertainers in their private lives, but also in the ways that creators create characters for television. So also some of my work looks at what is representation. So a
Mm.
lot of the representation of queer characters that we have are also queer characters in interracial relationships,
Yeah.
Black men who are with folks of other races,
Oh, absolutely. I see
right?
on Netflix, it's always someone Black in a holiday, Christmas, whatever the fuck. And
Yes,
Jerome on Ethan's arm, and they apple
yes,
picking, and it's just like,
yes.
Jerome
But there's
could be with
intention.
Tyreek.
Yes, but there's intentionality, I think, behind that, and I also think it's in response to the larger conversation about representation and like Black representation or diverse representations on screen, right? So the trajectory of, okay, what does it mean to have gay people on TV, period? And then, oh, well, we can't just have white gay men all the time. We need to expand. There are other types of gay people. And then one way that I think media, writers and people have done is they'd be like, well, we can just make one of the partners black, right? Like, I mean, like oftentimes the black person is not the focal point of the show
Sure.
with the interracial. They just happen to be the character, right? And so it's a good way to add diversity. It makes me think of people who would
Cool.
say things like, yeah, I just put it on like, oh, look, we got a black and a gay, or
Yeah.
we got black and gay, right? All at one time. But I does send a message out to young black people and young black queer folks about like what we see as possible in terms of relationships. What comes out about why people are dating white people is probably the most telling thing behind it, right? Like, because is it an argument about this is someone who I love who happens to be white, or I'm dating white people because of some type of internalized or problematic view that I have about myself that I'm projecting onto other black people.
Right. Right. There is always a conversation about internalized racism, or you've been hurt so much, right? So like when the preview came up about this show, there was a lot of like and as we do, and there was a comment that was said about like, date who you love. I hate all that, but I also was like, listen, I just want people to stand up in it, right? Just say you don't
Mm-hmm.
like the shit, and that's fine. I what I can say for myself is I love people who are being loved and who are safe, because I just know it's regardless of any race you are. I know being gay is motherfucking hard, and
Mm-hmm.
being black is harder, and being black and gay, oh God, we're at war,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
internally and externally.
Mm-hmm.
But in the preview, it talks about, um, his mother, doing like a being anti-gay, and I hate the fact that you're gay, and I'm praying for you, and yada yada yada. And the comment was the fact that, let's examine why they have run off to it, and the conversation ended up with the hypothesis of, well, maybe they ran to white men because all the black folks made them unsafe, and there was no like safe safety, or being, or whatever. And even with hetero stuff, right? Like Quincy Jones
Mm-hmm.
talks about, like his mother being living with schizophrenia and
Mm-hmm.
abusing him, and so his internalized idea of black women led him to only procreate with white women. You know what I mean? And I how do you provide doctor, help me.
That's a great question. I actually, I think there's a lot there to unpack, but I guess I'll start and just say that I think there's something about, like I said before, there's a difference between being in a relationship with someone who happens to be a different race and dating someone intentionally or not dating someone intentionally because of their race. Um, and when you put an intentionality behind it, given the history and the legacy of interracial relationships in this country in particular,
Mm.
when black people are holding white people or white partners up as the epitome of the best, more than anything, it reveals that this is something that is deeply seated about them and their experiences that they've never worked through about themselves, more than it being just like a, something that they like, that they were actually physically harmed in relationship. Like, I often find it interesting when people are talking about, oh, like what they are willing to put up with from people of other races or other types of people versus the things that they're willing to put up with black people. So you're
Mm.
willing to put up with this from someone who doesn't look like you, but if someone does look like you're not willing to put up with it. Or you have this expectation that um, people will treat you in a particular way.
Mm.
And give you this grace or this extension of grace that you need, that a black person, you in your belief, you can't get it from them. I think it's weird to say like, oh, black people ran to white people because that's where they felt safest around like their sexuality or those things, because homophobia exists across racial groups. It looks different in different places. Perhaps why you may run, that argument may work if you're like, one good thing is you can detach yourself from all of the connections that you ever made as a black person and find solace in the fact that you are a one and only, or the token in a situation. And some people love that, right? I mean, we have examples all throughout our lives of people who are like,
People
I don't
highlight
actually,
and
yeah,
love being a part of
I'm the
tokenism,
one. Yeah,
the exceptional Negro.
exactly. Right. So I don't look at it as any different than that, because ultimately what you're saying is, for every person that you could find who was white who accepts you for your sexuality, there are black people who would accept you for your sexuality as well. Are you putting the effort in finding those people in the same way as you would white people? Maybe not. But I think to use that as a reason why you might run to that, or it is an explanation away about it, is one thing. I also think it's interesting to just be like, I don't so much have a problem with people who are like, oh, I date people of other races. Like, I mean, there's no issue with that. I think the problem is that the vast majority of the examples that you get are black men who are gay, who are talking about why they date white men and saying all the bad negative things they could possibly say about black men in their conversation, right? Like, but none of those things apply to them apparently, right? Like they're the
Mm.
unique one, right? Like they're exceptional, right? Like, oh, I don't do any of these things. Like, black men are thugs, they're awful, they on the DL, they're doing that. You're not, right? So every man, for every example that you're giving, there's an example that is not true for it. So I think people find um, excitement and solace about feeling like they're unique, um,
Mm.
by dating someone of a different race, when oftentimes they're not, right? Like,
That's so interesting. This in this framework of maybe not so much of uh, almost almost an element of fetishization, right? But this idea of uniqueness, I am special. This me dating someone outside of my race provides me a personality trope to make me exceptional or different and a conversation piece or the it person because I'm different.
mhm.
I've never really thought of it that way. I've always thought of it as like a like as you say, like everything pejorative about the community that one comes from and they're trying to escape.
Yeah.
Earlier you were talking about, like media representation, right? And
Hmm.
oftentimes I have, in school and just talking to, the elders that be, sometimes I have learned over the years that gay means white for a lot of us.
Mm.
Like there is
Hmm.
an idea of that a lot of things that represent gay culturally, whatever that looks like, um,
Hmm.
is not necessarily rooted in anything American Negro, and I say that specifically. In the words
You
of
want a whole separate conversation of our other international black folks coming over to portray black American life?
yeah, listen,
Oh.
I that's another episode for another day. But you get what I mean. Like there is an idea of like when people think about marches and a lot of these other things and you and I were talking about in the health context, right? There's a lot of things that don't
Hmm.
necessarily and messaging even apply to us
Hmm.
when we talk about like marriage equality and things, and it's like it was a bunch of white gays and it's like, yeah, we can get married, and where all of us were like, well, niggas are still dying in the street, or
Hmm.
we still have disproportionately like HIV and AIDS affecting us. Black trans people are getting killed like left and right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm.
So I wonder about this whole gay equals white thing, and that how sometimes people attribute that to their own racial biases when it comes to dating.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this that I'm still working through in my own work about, you know, what is gay as an identity and what does it mean. Um, I was recently at a demography summit for queer demography, aka the study of population health and like population changes,
Mm.
but in particular about queer as an idea, like queer populations. And one of the things that came up at that conversation was like, in the US and in the West more generally, as we conceptualize it, so like European countries, we are like really obsessed with the concept of an identity. Like, what does it mean to identify as gay, to be read as seen as gay? And I've been reflecting on that a lot because, as someone who studies identity and identity development, I think part of what makes it so tricky is that you have a population of people who, one, are being, you know, when we talk about black people have been fighting to be recognized as people in this country for so long, just like as human on a humanistic level.
Listen, the three
And
fifths is just a
so,
thin line in the Constitution.
very quick, right? And so, but I think when we think of gayness and the concept of gayness historically, the difference between what I do sexually and who I have sexual relations with sexual relationships with behaviorally versus like attraction versus like identity is different.
Mhm.
And I do think that the conflation of maybe like gay identity and whiteness go hand in hand because we look at it, one, through these media representations and the discourse, like who has always been elevated or as an example of what is or what is not gay, right? Um, but also, we have a large, still ongoing national, international, rather, global association with um, whiteness and sexualities that are not heterosexual, right? So I think about
Mm.
examples of things that are happening in Ghana or what's happening in Kenya, right? These like the passages, or Uganda, or these things like black countries where people are like, we are passing these laws about sexuality. You cannot identify in this way, or this is a crime, a criminal offense. We're going to punish you with death, or these types of things. And, but it's linked to the idea that this is something that didn't exist here before we encountered those white people. Um, and that's not true, right? I mean, like, there are several researchers who talk about like what queer life looked like or non-straight identities look like in other societies, pre-colonization, pre-imperialism. But the messiness of the trajectory of what has happened in global history means that now we understand this as a thing where you have these outside countries, places like the US, like the European Union, like these places that are saying, we're better than you, or we're telling you you're backwards for these laws that you're making. And it's actually a much more complex conversation, because what does it mean to be like, these are the formal, like the former imperialist powers that used to dominate us, who are now telling us we need to accept these things that we haven't come to terms with ourselves. So it's a sticky situation.
Mhm.
In the US, though, even if you look at like examples of like who are gay TV characters, for a very long time they were white people
Yeah.
only, right?
Mhm.
So that conflation and idea that being white, being gay is a white thing, is something that comes up in my work all the time, because young people heard that growing up, right?
Mhm.
This is for white people. You don't have the liberty of doing that. And they also would talk about their parents saying to them, you don't have the liberty to do that because you have to deal with what it means to be black in this country.
Mhm.
So you don't have the latitude to identify as gay, because it's just going to make it even worse. Like, you're black and you're gay. Like, that's,
Yeah.
you know, families been like, you really want to do that?
Yeah.
And so it sucks, but that is us not reckoning with the history of how we have classically discriminated against people for how they choose to identify or what choices they make in their life.
No, that's very true, and I think that's where I was going to in my next part about like media representation, right? Like, and where this idea of gayness equals white is because of the fact that is how I personally, I can think about how I was socialized, right? And my first seeing somebody, queer on television was, I mean, Pedro is definitely not,
Mm,
white, but, and definitely, and Pedro had a black partner for the real world, but there was this idea
mhm,
of a white Latino being on
mm.
MTV, and also growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area. A lot of times, a lot of things was brought to my attention was white. But even as I got older, even like experiencing porn and stuff, like the first thing that if you just went to gay.com back in the day, that's all you really saw, and you never really think about other people that look like me may like the same shit that I do, you know, because you're
Yes.
working with this idea of am I normal? There's a lot of like psychosocial shit going on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a small story about this when you mentioned Pedro, actually, when you said that, it made me think of like, what's the first example I have? And I think in my own life, I remember very distinctly seeing Queer as Folk for the first time.
Mhm.
And I remember watching it and being like, I think it's in Pittsburgh. Honestly, this
Yeah,
is
it's
me
in
admitting
Pittsburgh.
I've
Yep.
never watched it. I've never watched it all the way through because I remember as a young teen watching it for the first time, the first episode, and they were in that like club and it was like in the dark room and they was having sex in the back and kind of whatever.
Yes.
And I was like, if this is what it means to be gay, I am not gay. And I was like, there is no way. And that was me as a teen being like, oh, I didn't know that the gays was getting down like this. Y'all fucking in the back of the club,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So I remember very distinctly, and part of why I'm writing about in my book project Noah's Ark as a show, because it was the only representation of Black gay life that focused on the lives exclusively of Black gay men, and they were the focal point, and they were doing things differently than these other shows that I had seen.
Hmm.
Because I remember people being like, "Oh, have you heard of this new show, Queer as Folk? Oh, they doing this, and I watched it like thinking, "Am I gay? Is this me?" And then I saw it, and I said, "Well, if this is what's going on,
Yes, amen.
I must be something else." And so it wasn't until I saw Noah's Ark and later on have been able to like reflect on the significance of that and interview people about the significance of examples of shows like that, where you get to say we're not just the one-off character in like my favorite, The Low Down Dirty Shame, or or other movies like
Shame.
black movies. Yes, black movies where they're like uh, gay characters, but they're not the focal point. It's not actually about their lives. They're like not given full 3D
Arcs.
representation of them as people, right?
Hmm.
Um, it wasn't until a show like Noah's Ark that I really got to say, okay, now we have something to play with here about what would it mean to be around Black people who are dating Black people who are also gay and connected in that way. And that's not something you saw very often. And so I remember that very clearly because there was a moment where I definitely, as a teen, was like, well, if this is how they're getting down,
and that's
let me
so
figure it out.
and that's so funny you mentioned that because I guess it is geographical as well because I remember watching Queer as Folk and I related to that because I lived in a space where that was kind of the norm, and that's how
Hmm.
I was exposed. And even when I got older and I was sneaking into clubs when I shouldn't have been, but I went to I went to a club that was very similar. I had like a
Mm,
like on Queer as Folk, it was Justin. He was like 17 sneaking into
mm,
clubs or whatever, and that was me.
hmm.
And that was the type of space I didn't really get to, like I said, nurture my black gayhood until way
Hmm.
later. But I always knew, but it never was like oh, I'm the tokenism. I knew what it was, but it was also,
Hmm.
I need to experience this just idea of gayness, right? Of like, oh, just liking
Hmm.
boys. And then I could deal with like, oh, I know there's more people that are like me. I can't be that, you know, like stuck in this mindset of like like
Hmm.
this is only a white thing. But I when I think about Noah's Ark and the importance of it, I do think that maybe there's a sect of people who didn't think this was possible, you
Hmm.
know because of like religious indignation or you know parental ignorance, bullying,
Mm-hmm.
religious, whatever the fuck.
Mm-hmm.
um, you and I have talked extensively over the years about community viral load and all that stuff about
Mm-hmm.
what it means to be Black, gay, and healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I'm wondering is and you briefly mentioned this to me, and I was like, "Oh, I hope you bring this up today," about access to healthcare, and maybe that might be a factor in interracial dating, or this idea of
Mm-hmm.
fear of getting something.
Yeah. Well, kind of as I said, I mean, as we've talked about, like one of the things that comes up in some of my work and presentations is about what do we do with all of the demographic information that we've collected. And so there have been several reports that have come out about what's the likelihood or the odds that you as a Black gay man would acquire HIV in your lifetime.
Mm.
And as those different reports have come out, of course, I'm someone who does ethnographic work. So that means, I'm going into communities and observing what's happening.
You're talking to
When those
motherfuckers.
reports, exactly, talking to them, what's happening? How are you interpreting this? One thing that always came up was if you hear a statistic like 1 in every 2 Black gay men will be HIV positive by the time they're 40, what is your takeaway as a Black 20-year-old or a Black 18-year-old or a Black 30-year-old? Well, do you think of it as inevitable? And so you say, oh, well, it's just going to happen to me. I don't need to take any preventative measures because it sounds like no matter what I do, it's going to happen. Once in some of those conversations, I know one conversation that happened was someone said, well, it sounds like we need to stop dating each other. And maybe we need to start dating these, dating white people or dating Asian people or people who don't have as high of a likelihood of acquiring HIV across the life course. And so I think there are lots of things I could say about that, about like whether or not that's actually a strategy. But I think even the idea that it would be considered or thought of as a strategy, like interracial dating as a strategy to avoid HIV acquisition, is an interesting one, because I do think it's not the first and only time that I've heard that. It was a conversation, of course, with several folks, but I don't think people talk about that as forwardly as it probably plays a role in their minds. Like
Mm.
some of the things, you mentioned earlier, are not just health, but like class. So Hollywood to me is like a class conversation as well, right? Because you're
Yes.
talking about Los Angeles, you're talking about people who are trying to make it, people who are like, I'm moving out here. And you're talking about a diminishing Black demographic population. There
Mm.
were, at one point, Black people in Los Angeles were over 10% of the population. Now they're less than, maybe like what? They're around 7-8% of the population.
7. Yep.
Right. So you're talking about a diminishing Black population and a focus on this idea of capitalist climbing. So, like, in order to align myself with opportunities and money and things, the people who have the money or the people I view as having money are white people. And therefore, I'm going to align myself with them to make it in this industry in a particular way. So, I don't think you can separate those, but I also think it has to do with that. Yes, I do think some people, one of the ways they rationalize why they're doing what they're doing is through these things that they've been taught about. If I'm with another Black person, there's a higher chance that I will become HIV positive, or there's a higher chance that this will happen to me across the life course. And so it becomes a good strategy for some of them for why they're dating and choosing to partner in the way that they do.
Yeah. That's a hell of a pill to swallow. That's a big ass prep pill to swallow. This idea,
Yes.
and hell of a harm reduction strategy.
Yeah.
Like, well, stop fucking niggas, and you might not get it. Like, because
Yes.
that's brass tacks is what it sounds like to me. Um,
Yes. But what it is also it doesn't take into account part of what you mentioned earlier, this larger argument about like what populations have been able to get a handle on the HIV epidemic versus not, which are largely connected to racism, to access to healthcare broadly, to care that you get, from medical professionals, like medical racism, those types of things. So yes, in many ways, white gay men have totally drastically shifted what the HIV landscape looks like for that demographic across the US. Black people have not been able to do that in the same way. And that's not just, and it's not what we know from the research is it's not that they're doing different behaviors. They're not more sexually risky. They're not using this less or doing this less or more likely to do anything quote unquote risky. But it's these other things, right? Like access to actual medical care, or how often are you getting tested, or do you have a resource or a place that you can rely on to give you those types of supports? That's the reason why they're not, you know, virally suppressed or able to get access to medication. And so I think it relies on this idea that it sounds like, oh, it's a good strategy because, oh, white people are less likely to be contracting right now. And so if we date white people, it'll lower the likelihood that we will get the virus. But it doesn't take into account the reason why black gay men in particular, are still struggling to get a handle on the epidemic, which has to do with these larger issues about race and racism in our country, right? Around access to care. And so basically it's like, well, I can't fix the racism. But what I can do is date these white people.
I have found that I have a joke. I might have to put this behind a paywall. Going out in WeHo, or even in the Castro in San Francisco, or even when we both used to live in New York, and we would go like Hell's Kitchen and things. Often things that I would overhear is, "Oh my God, Eduardo, stop!" And it's this idea of having a white guide into their world, and it's almost like, fetishization, right? This idea of like, I want to be a part of their world. So I have found a white person, a magical white, to bring me into their world, and vice versa. How do you, and even in online dating, there is, that common trope of, no rice, no fats, no femmes, that whole thing, no spice.
Yeah,
And
chocolate and rice, no spice, and it was something that kind of
all that fucked up nonsense, right? Let's chat about it.
Yeah. Online dating itself is just such an interesting thing. And I have a paper that I wrote years ago with a friend of mine about how some of the features on some of the dating apps actually were being used to avoid racism. So like black men who would block white men or filter them out. The paper was called Blocking and Filtering. And we talked about those features where people were using them to actively avoid racist encounters. So like, rather than being worried that like some white man in the neighborhood is going to call me a monkey or an ape, I can filter out all the white people, and not be worried about that. And so, but I think what underlies this still is this question of like, okay, if you filter out all of a race of people, how is that racially exclusionary? And what is the motivation or the impetus behind why you're doing it, right? And so what I found was like, yes, a lot of black people were using the apps to protect themselves from having racist encounters, which is not the same as saying like, I'm not attracted to them or I don't like them. But they were afraid of even opening themselves up to the possibility sometimes of dating people of other races, because what they were getting were either blatantly racist comments or like the fetishing comments, like bring your BBC here, or like, oh, that kind of,
Mm-hmm.
mandingo mindset kind of thing. That's different to me than like, I don't date like, you know, I don't date Asians, or I don't date blacks, or I don't date Indian, or that. Like, that's a different kind of orientation, because like, why are you filtering and or blocking different races and groups of people out?
Mm-hmm.
Is different. I do think though that there is something to be said about, to your point about, do you have a guide into the world? I think people are fascinated in things that they don't know anything about, right? And so like, dating fundamentally is like, yeah, you want to meet someone, learn from them, have a great experience with them. And so sometimes those experiences are good, like you go out with someone, they're different than you, and you've learned something. Some people are seeking something that's so different from their reality because of the things we mentioned before. So yes, if you've had a traumatizing experience, that may trigger you to say, I'm going to avoid this group of people altogether, because I don't even want to open up the possibility that this is something that's negative that could happen to me. That just means there's a lot of work that needs to be done around trauma and internalized homophobia, internalized racism that people have, the stigma that they've taken on, as I like to study, right? Stigma fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't done enough work as a people to find ways to make sure that we are not taking on those stigmas as problems of our own. And what that translates to then is, you have these people who come out and say black people are like this because of the one negative experience that they had growing up with. And oftentimes you hear these examples. It's not like they're saying every single black person I've met did this. It's like they're thinking often of like one clear example in their mind, but that was a life transformational example for them. Like, I will never talk to a black person. I'm like, I'm only dating white, or I'm only dating this, because that's what they like. The fetishism conversation is something completely different, right? Because we have this whole, like, there's a whole thing where people do, they fetishize different races, different types of people, and different types of bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's enough for some. For some people, that's as deep as they want to go anyway. But if you're trying to build a relationship with someone and actually have a connection with them, if the only reason you think they like you is because of the shape of your body, or
The
that
color
you
of your
represent
skin.
the color of your skin, like, what are we talking about? This whole sidebar where I think about, like, things I hate, like writing books. Like, as I'm working on my book now, it's like when people write things like, oh, chocolate skin, or like, his honeysuckle, blah, blah, blah. Like,
Yeah.
why are you, let's not do that.
I'm not
Let's not
food,
do it.
nigga.
I hate I hate it. I
Yeah.
hate it. So,
Yeah.
for me, I think of those things when I think about it. It's like that fetishism, like, I'm going to reduce you to an object so that I can think about what your utility is to me. And it's
Hmm.
not about an actual relationship between two people of growth. It's like, you can do this for me because you have the parts, and that's it. And for some people, that's enough. I don't know if we should call it online dating then. It's not really dating, it's like something else. But
It's shopping.
yes, exactly. Um, there we go.
I know I keep going back to Hollywood, but I think about oftentimes people try to do mental gymnastics, and even in certain communities, where like large metropolitan communities, where people will say, I date X because this is in my group, or
Mm.
I date X because this is all who happens to be in my income bracket.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now I find that very lazy. Um, because I feel, I like who I like, and if I have to search for it, then I will. But I
Mm.
don't necessarily want to be relegated to the fact that, well, because this is who I'm around all the time, and this is it almost sounds like you're settling because this is who the fuck is around you. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I live near a McDonald's. And it's like, well, I could make this whole fancy meal, but I'm gonna go McDonald's. It's right there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I mean,
if you need me to put it
I
behind a
was
paywall, I'll still put it.
no, no, it's not that. I guess what I'm thinking through with this though is like it's exposure, and also like it's not by happenstance that certain groups of people are making certain types of money, or certain groups of people that you're able to connect with. So if you're someone who's like, I need my partner to make six figures or make this amount, 200, $300,000 a year, the amount of people that make that amount of money among each racial group is not by happenstance, right? It's like that's part of the design. So you're relegating yourself to certain groups. Another thing that always came up, I think, especially in LA, what I remember, thinking, about that when I was working on my project, at least, is like the people who are your friends are often people who are in those same positions as you. And so there becomes this point where it's like, well, if you're not dating your friends, who are you dating? Because there aren't enough other people who you feel like are part of that same class alignment that you're talking about. And I think the interplay between race and class is so integral in the LA situation, right? Where if you're arguing about who you want to have a relationship with in that sense, you have limited pickings in a place where the Black population is dwindling, right?
That's fair.
I grew up in a Black city, or I'm
Very,
from
very Black.
a Black, exactly. So at no point in time was I ever thinking that. Now I did go to school with a lot of predominantly white schools, but I don't think that ever shifted my perspective on like, well, this is what I'm exposed to, so therefore this is what I'm relegated to date.
Yeah. And even personal story, I've dated two white men, and it wasn't because that's what I was socialized into thinking. It was, I've always been like, oh, these are people who are into me, so why not be into them? You know what I mean? They approach me, and which is a different type of psychological thing as opposed to race or anything like that. But what I did find is that both of those relationships ended because of race. One I found out was in the race play. Didn't know that until it was too late. And I was
We're
like,
too late.
Yes, too late. I found out we were in the middle of, and asked me, can I call you a nigger? And I was like, skoy, absolutely the fuck not. And then afterwards, the next person happened to be white as well, or what you would deem spicy white. And that ended because they wanted to be with somebody who was more, as I quote, he's a little bit more of a thug than you are. And I like that. So I was like, okay, here we get into this fetishization of you want to be, with, somebody you see on like BET, or whatever weird urban fantasy that you have, and karma, bit both of them in the ass, but like one's not attractive and the other one is on cocaine strung out somewhere. So
Oh no.
hey, listen, God looks out for me, okay? So
Terrible.
but that was the last time, and ever since then
Yeah, well, I don't really have a time to talk about, so
and props to you, honey, but
not in that way. Not in that way. No, there's been no extensive dating in that regard for me. But I will say, yes, the fetishization piece that you're talking about is always the question, right? And when you have these very one-dimensional views about what a race or a group of people could be, that's where it becomes problematic to me again, right? I mean, I think a lot of people online, on Twitter, on Facebook, or people are arguing about like, should, like, I'm not invested in an argument about whether or not you should or should not be able to date someone of a different race. Like, I don't really care, because as I like to say,
If
you
you
like it,
you love it.
you love it, because it don't have anything to do with me. Exactly. That is my always saying. You like it, you love it, because it don't have anything to do with me. But I do want to say, when it starts to have something to do with you is when then Black people take their platforms to disparage other Black people as the reason for why you date white people or you date someone of a different race. If you want to date them, do that. That doesn't require you to then turn around and say, because all Black people are this, or all Black people are that, or all the Black men that I encounter are like this. That's unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the problem is for me. It's like, I don't actually care what you want to do. If you're happy when you roll over in the morning and see that face, enjoy.
Yeah.
But don't come out and then just start to like create further stereotypes and disparaging remarks about people who are already at the mercy of controlling images, as the sociologist Patricia Hill Collins would say.
Oh,
Right?
my
Like,
favorite.
we don't need that. Exactly. We don't need you to add to the chorus of the controlling images or like the types of stereotypes that people take up. We know, ride off into the sunset with your.
You have a Black friend and they date somebody white, and they always hit you with the they're white, like they're always like always almost dismissing them or almost insulting them because of who they are and choose to. And now, I don't necessarily like to be, apologetic for white people, but I always end up feeling sorry, because it's like, well, nigga, you chose to be with me, and now you just shaded me to your friends or whatever, just because of the color of my skin or my race. You know what I mean? And I
Mhm.
always find like, well, if you're going to be disparaging to your partner, then why date them?
Great question. Can't answer why they choose to date who they date. Like I said, you like it, you love it. But I will say this, to my earlier point, that people date people who will put up with how they show up. And if you can find a white person who will put up with the fact that you're constantly disparaging to them, and I think there's a difference between like, why there are, a lot of, well, I won't say a lot. I have quite a few friends who are in interracial relationships, yes,
Mm-hmm.
who are queer, Black, and dating white, and have white partners, white
Mm-hmm.
husbands, white wives, all of that. To me, it's about what is the sensibility of that white person. Are they taking it as a joke? Do they feel some type of, maybe they don't take it as like, this is disparaging comments about me or you're making fun of me. And some of them actually lean into it because they're like, I actually have no idea what y'all are talking about. I actually don't know. And that's okay. Um,
Right.
that's fine for me, actually. Like, actually own your whiteness and know, like what's the work you're actually doing to reckon with what it means to hold the race that you hold in this society. Fine. And if your partner, your white partner, is comfortable with you making jokes or cracking on them or saying whatever you want whenever you say it, I'm not defending your white partner because that's not my job. They need to be able to speak up to you about why they're uncomfortable about what you're saying about them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say anything bad about them because I don't know them, and it's not my place to do it.
Right.
But you can say whatever you want to say, and maybe they like that. Maybe that's one of their kinks. Maybe they like you talking bad about them to other people. I don't know. But this is another place where I say, I'm not in it. So it worked. It seems like it works for y'all. Y'all
Mm-hmm.
together. You've been together for however long. My problem is when you don't know the difference between when you should or should not bring your white partner around.
You may not bring your white wife. This is an Africans only event.
Yes. That is the question. When you have a function, or that your friends are dealing with something that's about race, and it has to do like something they're experiencing at work, or a situation that they're going to, and Black people come together maybe to talk about how to deal with racism and how to do certain things. There's a space for affinity group.
Yep.
There's space for you to get together with people who share your experience and have that worldview without having to go through the teaching of that worldview to someone who doesn't have it. And I think sometimes what ends up happening is people who are in these relationships forget that, and instead think that if my Black friends have invited a set of people around, I'm going to bring my partner to that space. And I think that can be disruptive, um, because the partner needs to know, maybe this isn't a space I should be going to,
Mm,
or maybe you actually don't need me there. But that's the type of white person to me that it's like, okay, I can understand why you date someone like that, because there's a sensibility around what are the implications of me being white in a relationship with a Black person. But people who just ride the wave and go along with it, not so much.
right. How do you feel about familial attitudes and cultural expectations that impact the willingness of us Black folk to date interracially, right? Like, I personal anecdote when I was coming up, because I was born in the '80s. I don't have a father, so so my cousins always told me, don't go white, go light. And I was just like, okay, whatever. That's tea.
Mm.
But I'm wondering in this context of family dynamics, how important does that play into interracial dating? Like, is there something of that type of statement, or is it like how our parents our boomer parents will force us to like get a government job? I'm sure we've heard that a lot often, right? Because that provides you access and security to things,
Hmm.
you know
Hmm.
but it's also combated with this idea of, if we can't share a comb, don't bring them home. So
Well, I would say, that's what I remember my grandmother saying. She can't use my comb, don't bring her home. And, you know, for better or worse, some of my cousins completely, I feel like that like pushed them in the path to like go a completely different route, where they were like, now you've told me that this is forbidden. And so I'm going to probe it.
yeah.
Um, I do think that there are expectations from family that can play a role in why people are dating interracially. And I think in particular, though, for Black Americans, some of the things that our grandparents, our great grandparents, even our parents are saying are founded in actual things and reasons why you should avoid it. So long historical legacies of white women making claims about what Black men have done to them that have not been true. So one of the strategies to avoid that is to say, don't date them or stay away from them, right? Like stay
Yeah.
away from them to avoid this. Is that a strategy that works? Yeah, debatable.
Mm.
But of course, as over time, as society has become more, I'll say more desegregated in some spaces, because I wouldn't say it's fully integrated in the way we may think. But as that has become a possibility, it means that those examples become no longer rooted in it's people start to perceive the things that their grandparents or great grandparents and whoever is saying to them as being backwards, rather than it being rooted in things that our family members have experienced that have put them in the same places where they are right now. So like,
Hmm.
we know historically in all families, like we have those stories like this happened between a white person and a Black person, or part of the reason why the vast majority of African Americans in the U.S. have white percentages is because of enslavement
Yeah.
and rape and things like that. And so with that knowledge, it is a dangerous proposition to say I'm going to deal with a white person in the society, and it has been historically. I mean, so our families do say those things. It definitely plays a role in it. Now, whether you choose to listen to your family or go or deviate, whether that pushes you to be more wary or more open, is hard to tell. That's not something that I've actually looked into, but I do think there's a reason why our families, black families, often are saying those things. And it also depends, like you said, do you relegate yourself to what you're surrounded by? Like where you grew up, I do think plays a big role in what you see. Like, you know, who is and what is not attractive. A lot of that comes from those formative years. Like, and if you're the only, you're the only black person in your school or the only one of two, and people think you're naturally going together, that's not how that works. Or if you think, oh, there are only two gay people in the class because only two of us are out, like people automatically try to put you together. Or like, how many times have you grown up and somebody said, oh, you gay? I know somebody gay. I'm going to introduce you to him. Like, it's naturally going to come together. So do you think all of those things play a role? Family plays an interesting role, especially when you add the element of being queer or being gay, because do you actually take those to heed? Because even the story of if she can't use my comb, don't bring her home, comments like that are predicated on um, compulsory heterosexuality or the idea that you're going to be heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I said when you brought this up, like the movie Dirty Laundry, because it's supposed to be like that combination of both of those terrible things at one time. Like you're gay and you brought home a white person. Like what's going on, right? So films like that, I think, take these tropes or these things that we know and play with them. But like the actual reason isn't just like, oh, black people don't like white people. It's not like your grandmother's telling you, I don't like white people, so don't date them. Just on principle. It's like they're telling you this because of things that they watched happen to the people who tried to date white people growing up, or the issues that they had, right? Like it wasn't like, it was like there were people who were killed, like family members, or like people burning crosses on people's lawns and
Right.
crazy stuff like that. You know what I mean? So like,
Right.
is it worth it? It ain't worth, it's not worth it. It doesn't like just date
Right.
somebody black